like to go a little more about what you said today at the Masterclass.
I'm inspired by reality, I'm inspired by life, and I try to make something which looks as close as possible to life, but of course it's fiction and it's a convention, and you get inside the theater and it's dark and you're watching the story of somebody else. It's fiction, but the whole thing is to be able to cross this border at some point and to forget that it's fiction. If you manage at some point to create this illusion for the spectators, you know that they got inside knowing it's just fiction, but still they feel impressed. And what I'm always trying to do is to try to find a story that will talk for my audience about their own life. I hope that at the end, even if I get inspiration from the things which are close to me, I manage to have them general enough in the film and universal enough so that they will speak about human nature, and they will speak to people who live in very, very different countries, very far away from the local context and situation which inspired me originally. And eventually what I hope is that when people get out of the theater, they start realizing that the film is asking or is generating some questions also about their own life and experience. I think that cinema has this wonderful capacity of giving you this possibility of watching the story of somebody else on screen, but still understanding that it speaks about you. You need to watch yourself in this mirror that cinema places in front of you, and eventually if you find this capacity of being honest with yourself, you will realize something about your own moment in life. But this is only happening if you're, in this kind of cinema who is inspired by, reality and everyday life events. I'm not sure if it's a way of controlling the film. It's a way of, first of all, of discovering the film, because you can speak about the film after you have it ready, and you can speak about the story once the screenplay is finished. But when you start, you don't have anything, and it's a very, very difficult moment. You just have the wish of making another film. So writing is for me the process in which I find my ideas, my story, my meanings, the feeling that I speak about something important, my motivation and energy for doing again this process, which is very painful. Filmmaking can be very, very painful. With this kind of very long takes is even more painful, because the level of precision that you need to reach is very, very high. There's nothing you can fix later on. So this is what writing is about. It's about discovering, it's about trying to understand what you're talking about. I don't have the answers of what I talk about when I start. I discover this little by little while writing, that this could be speaking about this, and the meaning of all this can shed some light upon something that I felt in my own life, and little by little this thing grows a lot within the screenplay. But then it's just a text. You need to have a film. So you need to translate, in a way, this text with people on a set, and you have to adapt the rhythm to the real rhythm in which things happen. It's not so easy as it looks when the film is finished, because you haven't shot the film already, you don't know, it's the first time when you do this, and at the beginning you have a space like this and a situation, and you have to figure out how to do this, and you are clueless for a long while. If you look for a single perspective from which to capture a very complex scene, and especially with people talking to one another, that's complicated, because there aren't too many ways in which you can place people in a situation. Very often people watch one another when they talk. So finding alternatives to this, it's not easy. If you watch my 3 or 4 last films, I'm always looking for a way in which people more or less also face the camera and they talk to one another, and I have to fill in the space with a lot of characters, and I have to figure out what would be the right position of the camera in different moments of these long scenes in which it will capture what's the most important thing. Some of it will fall off, and I know this already, it won't be in the shot, but it's a complex process. The framing is very important, and you have to decide it right before you shoot. And then, as much as you know about how you want your actors to act and to be natural, it's not easy. For me, they don't need to invent much. They need to interpret what I tell them to do in a very personal way. And these are the actors that I can work with. If I ran across an actor that would tell me, so why am I saying this? Why wouldn't I be saying this? I have a problem, because I spent 6 months or 1 year thinking about what he has to say to be coherent with his character, with the whole screenplay, having to deal with 60, 70, 100 people on the set, which all have their own private life during the moment when you make the film. That's not easy. And especially if you make films like I did for the last 2, which are away from your hometown, that's very complex. I'm not trying to complicate things more than I found them to be complicated in reality. Again, I'm trying to quote reality, and reality is ambiguous. Something which is really very, very actual in Europe and in the world today. And it speaks about our need and desire to be happy and to pursue the happiness. Because we were told that we are free to be happy. And you need to do this because this is one of the values of the today's society. And in order to do this, people use this newly found freedom that they were given, and I refer to a very specific freedom for us, for example, the freedom to circulate and to travel and to work wherever you want, to be happy like tomorrow, not, 10 years from now, and not for your children. And this is why people move so much in search of this happiness, not understanding that sometimes they associate this happiness with some distant places which are fictional. They exist only in their own imagination, because you always imagine. This is why people need to think about heaven. But actually, what is heaven then? Your idea that there is a place where things happen perfectly and it's something to wish for. And there is an equivalent of this heaven in the real world. And for us, for a long while, we associated this heaven with the Western civilized society. Now, of course, people they get some feedback after 30 years that things are not, are more complex than this. But still, their first reaction is to flee, is to go in a place where things are much more organized, when things can happen easier tomorrow. And from the perspective of a parent, it's a very difficult advice to have for your children. I started with my first film, I said this morning, and then I thought that I was having a very strong advice for people of my generation to stay and change things there so that the society would evolve. Now, because I have children and it's like 20 years later, I won't be so firm about this. I think that you need to let people decide for themselves, because nobody gives you this authority of telling somebody that he needs to be patient and that he won't necessarily be happy in this life, and maybe his children will be, but nobody knows. There is no guarantee. The film speaks about how honest you are with yourself, how much you can see yourself at this age really with the things that you accomplished, and how much your life is based on the lies that you say. There are some people who lie as much in their lives that they can't really make the truth the difference at some point between what is the truth of their lives and what are the lies. They lied so much that they can't really make this difference. And this is not something regional. This is part of human nature. It's happening everywhere, because after a certain age, the most complicated thing to do is to live with yourself, to wake up in the morning still with yourself, and therefore you need to have kind of a good impression about yourself, because if not, it's going to be very difficult to live one more day. That relationship between compromise and honesty was important, but basically I left from a different kind of relationship that I wanted to have in the film, the one between compromise and education. This is what I was interested. And the one between compromise as a personal choice that you can avoid or make, and corruption in society. I make this difference between compromise and corruption because corruption is something that we always associate with the others. We never consider ourselves to be corrupt. We speak about corruption in society, but actually you never recheck if you're not kind of like tolerating or encouraging this kind of corruption. So this was one of the relationships that I was interested about. The other one was this relationship between education and compromise, because I felt that our societies are not progressing because we keep on educating our children the same way in which we were educated. Because as a parent, this is the first reflex that you're having, to tell the children more or less the same things that you were told. Then there's something else connected with the fact that education is not made only through the things that you tell children to do. They see you acting, and this is much more important for them as an experience than what you tell them, because this is real life. You can tell them that it's very good not to lie, but they will see yourself lying in some day, and they understand that part of this theoretical discourse is just bullshit. It's not something that goes for the real life. So these were my thoughts about this. Then I was thinking in connection to this a lot about aging and about reaching that moment in your life when you understand better the meaning of your decisions, of your earlier decision. Because, I don't know, you have what they call experience, and your mind broadens and you start understanding why you were deciding like this when you were younger. When you're younger, you're like an animal who reacts to things, and some people stay like this up to the end. I hate this kind of cinema where people know precisely why they decided about something. Oh, come on. Do you know in your life why you did something? You did it on the moment, and even if you think why you did it, it's not necessarily the right answer. It's what you believe about your causes, but it could be something completely different. So from all this thinking, I came to this idea that at this age, when you understand that your life is the result of your choices, there's nothing much you can change. So what people do if they have children, they hope that this experience will serve for their children, and they will prevent their children from making the same mistakes that you made. This is a very funny aspect of being a parent, that you discover yourself saying the same useless things to your children that your parents had told you, and they never worked. But nevertheless, you can't stop from, I don't know, this reflex of telling children what to do, even if you understand that you needed to be a person, and that need started when they allowed you to make your own mistakes. But somehow there's a cycle and people repeat all this. I can't identify this as a moment. Sometimes later people kind of revisit their biography and they find a moment and invent a moment. But I don't want to do this. It's not a moment. It's a process. And this process is connected with a context. It wasn't possible for me to think about filmmaking during the communist times because it was a very closed society. You needed to go to the university to study film to be recognized as a filmmaker. I speak about the 80s. There were no telephones, no cameras, so you need to be part of the system. And me, I couldn't go to the film school just like this because the film school was kind of closed. It was for the more or less sons and daughters either of the people who were important in that period in the party or whatever, or to the sons and daughters of people working in film or in art somehow, of actors, directors. It was very, very closed. So it wasn't even worth trying to do this. I was having friends that were trying to do this for 5, 10, 15 consecutive years, to have this entrance examination, failing all the time. So I knew at the beginning that this needs to stay as a dream and I won't be able to do this, and it's important to be able to tell your stories however you can. And I always felt that I'm more free with words because it's something that you control, something that doesn't depend on anybody else. But I was always having this idea in mind that maybe someday, if I have a possibility, I will express myself in a different way as well. So I started not only as a writer is a lot to say, but writing, but also I was making pictures. I was working for this first journal when I started writing as a photographer as well. When communism collapsed, I was a student. I was studying first of all languages at the university in my hometown, and I was working as a journalist. I graduated from that university and I was a teacher for a period, but I knew that I don't have any excuse now not to try to become a filmmaker. I think that it's good to start thinking about filmmaking not when you're very young, but to do something before, and to start thinking about this when you're having kind of a life experience, and when you start, I don't know, understanding people a little bit. I think it's important for a filmmaker to, you know, be aware of the social and of the human models around him, and to be perceptive, to observe people, to understand people, to have his own stories, to have passed through personal situations, and then little by little you start telling these stories.